Good evening. It's good to see everyone out. All right, we're picking up in lesson 2. We had just barely got into lesson 2 last week. We're on lesson 1, and we were ready for part 3. But just real quick, does someone want to give us a brief? So question number 1, of course, is after reading Genesis 2:24, answer the following questions. What does it mean first to leave in the context of marriage? So I want to give us a quick definition of what it means to leave, what we talked about last week. Norm?
Basically to start a new family unit of husband and wife.
Okay. Yeah, what does it not mean?
Your father and mother.
Yeah, so we're not totally doing away with our relationship that we have with our parents. We're still to honor our parents. We still have a responsibility to them. That's one of the reasons I threw Mark chapter 7, 10 through 13, and 1 Timothy 5, verse 4. We've created our own family, created our own unit, and that's where our focus is going to be, and not so much on the family that we have left. And one of the points that I did want to make, didn't make it last week, this isn't just in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 24. Okay, this is repeated multiple times. Jesus himself repeats it. We see it in Matthew and Mark. We see it in Ephesians. So this is pretty significant in the realm of marriage. Leave, cleave, and become one flesh, because it is repeated. And if it's going to be repeated, we better make sure we pay attention to it.
Yeah, another thing that we look at also is the idea of God pays a lot of attention to things like inheritance and respect due to elderly people as part of God's law. And so that's totally consistent with the idea of that you have a family unit, and you don't lose a family unit as a result of bringing up a new family unit. That's all those things are still in place, and they're important to God.
Yeah, we mentioned obviously when you leave your mom and dad, you still need them. Okay. They've been through what you're starting, and so they can have advice, and it's okay to ask for advice, but it's not okay to go around your spouse's back and say, what do I do about this? Like, how am I supposed to handle this? How can I handle her? How can I handle him? Like, tell me can you believe he's doing this? That's not what we do, but we can still rely on them as well while we continue to honor them. All right, what about cleaving? What did we discuss as far as what it means to cleave?
Together, emphasizing the permanency of marriage.
Yeah, so there is, with this new unit now that you have, there is this closeness that the definition, if you look at, does have this sense of gluing or binding together, which then leads us very well into question C, which is what does it mean to become one flesh, and what can we learn from that? Ken?
Well, it means to become a unit, inseparable as husband and wife, and of course there's also the physical aspect of that, but I think it's the idea of realizing that she's your wife and you're her husband forever, until death do you part.
Okay. Go ahead, Norm.
It's the idea of a single unit acting in concert. So acting as one. And this is why the idea of the headship is used, because it's in relation to a body, and the mind is the thing that directs the unit of the body. All of these parts, moving, working parts, are directed by one head. And so it's given that idea, and again, God is consistent with his examples and how that's actually carried out.
Jesse Jackson, what do you think?
On the one flesh point?
Yeah.
Well, it's something that God does, right? He does that joining. So you might say it's on more than one level.
Yeah, I think that I know a younger me would have just thought, okay, this is one flesh, it's all sexual, it's all physical in nature, and that is included. I mean, if you look up the Greek word that is used and you see the definition, it does talk about being one body or one person, and it talks about being naked and the skin. But there's more to it than that. And one of the comments that L.A. Stouffer had made in his book, he says, the uniting of the bodies of a husband and wife as one flesh is a fitting expression of the intimacy, boundless sharing, and total merging that marriage demands of a male and a female. And oftentimes when we use the word intimacy, we're thinking just of the sexual relationship as well, but there are the husband and wife in the marriage relationship is to be intimate more beyond just the physical connection and the sexual relationship that we have. Jesse, did you have something? You just scratching your head?
That's right.
So one of the other things that I had read was talking about the oneness that you have together. It's emotional, moral, social, physical, and spiritual. So there is this connection, and Lena actually made this point in our very first class of this connection that we're to have. And so it really is this oneness. Again, not excluding the physical and the sexual part of it, because we do know that is part of it as well. But Andy had made a good point too last week. Andy, you want to remind us of kind of the progression that we see with these three terms?
Yeah, from the beginning one there, that you leave as individual people, and then through the marriage unit you cleave to each other to the point that you become one unit.
Yeah. And when you think of something being glued together, we think of it being together, but oftentimes it's still two things that are just glued together. Well, this one flesh, now you've taken it further than that, and it literally is one. And that's the way that we have to think of it whenever we think about our marriage relationship as husband and wife. And this is God's expectation. So the whole class for this lesson is about God's design for marriage. And God's design for marriage is that we are one, that there is this oneness, this unity. Now, does that mean that everything that I think, Clarissa's going to think, and that we're going to agree on everything? Is that what that means? That's what it is in our relationship. I don't know about y'all's, but she thinks exactly like me.
But it does mean that you can't leave her out of a decision either. That you got to work together to make those big decisions.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that some with our next lesson. But there is this idea of total oneness. Go ahead, Norm.
The Bible uses the example, and it's a good visual example of the rope, because they didn't have the glues like back in the day like we did. But that idea of this rope, where you have these separate fibers basically they're twisting around each other to the point where they're all carrying equal load, and it's a beautiful picture of that. And if one of those fibers breaks, disaster occurs, because whatever the load was before, it's definitely not changed.
Yep. Any other comments on leaving, cleaving, and one flesh? Andy?
Whenever as a kid, I don't know how old, I don't remember, but a lot of our young people that sit up front there kind of remind me of that, as we always try to sit up front. But we had a whole gospel meeting on the home and family, and while the preacher was there, he had gone down to wherever he was staying with the other preacher anyway. He went and got two horseshoes welded together, and then he brought them up there as his prop. And he dropped them, where we had a stage, and then we were on, so he had a pretty good piece, and they clunked, and then they rolled down there to the aisle, but there they were, welded together. They were stuck together, and just as a kid, I still remember that to this day, that illustration of those two horseshoes that he had made one.
Yeah. And our marriages are welded together by a professional welder, because I've seen some welding that it wouldn't stick. But God's got us together, so we're going to stick. All right, question number 2. Read Matthew 19, 1 through 9, and tell what we can learn about God's design for marriage from Jesus' teaching. So this is a very well-known passage. We've discussed it even recently with a sermon from Jesse, so we won't take the time to read through that. But what are some things that we can take away from this as far as God's design for marriage? Drew, what do you think? What's something that you got to take away from that passage?
Just once God has joined something together, it's not permitted to separate.
Okay, so what does that tell us in terms of the marriage relationship? Okay, it's a permanent relationship. That's God's design, and that's one of the things that I think that we can definitely see from this, that obviously we can't break the bond. The bond is welded together, so to speak, and so we're not able to break that. He talks about not putting it asunder, what he has joined together. And we talked about in Jesse's lesson about how God hates divorce, and so I think that's definitely one of the things that we can learn from that, is marriage is a permanent relationship. Norm?
Jesus takes it back to the beginning, so this predates the law of Moses. It predates being a Christian, et cetera, et cetera. And so as a result of that, you've got to stay with that concept that this is something that is permanent, and it's from the beginning. And there's nothing in society or any other outside organization that has authority over this union.
All right, so it's from the beginning. So we talked about in the very first class that it is the marriage relationship is something that is ordained by God. It is a God-ordained relationship. I think that we can see that from this passage. He's the one that establishes the marriage bond. And so that's something that, yes, again, that was from the beginning. Andy?
A couple things that I was thinking about. One, I guess that with the way that our society is, how important it is for people to understand that God is over everybody. A lot of times people get to thinking that, God doesn't have any control over me because I'm not a Christian. I mean, and that's said by even people that are, that use that incorrectly. But he is. He's over all of mankind, over everything. And so we're under whatever kind of law that he has given to us. And then the other thing that we see is that just because our government or our society says that this something is legal, doesn't mean that it's legal under God's rules and laws.
Yeah.
So there's have to be very careful there. I mean, and Jesus made that point there with, that Moses did this but it wasn't to be this way.
And we'll talk about that a little more with the civil question, but that kind of goes along with one of the things that I've got written down, is that marriage is a God-regulated relationship. All right, it has nothing to do with what we think or what society thinks, but God said it, and we can read it, and he's expressed his will for our marriage, and it's our duty to accept his arrangement. That's just all there is to it. Over in Psalm 85, verse 8, it says, I will hear what God the Lord will speak. So let's listen and let's do it, because it's God regulated. And then something that Andy had mentioned made me think too. So there's another thing that we can see just from the passage about marriage, and that's who it's for. So who's marriage for? A male and a female. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Marriage is a male and female relationship, and this is something that is becoming very, very critical, that we make sure that we are very, very clear on what God's expectation is. I read 2 stories this week, and the one story was about how the Pope is now allowing for blessings to happen for same-sex couples. Still not entirely saying that they're okay with the same-sex marriages, but that they're allowing blessings to be given, that priests can now give blessings to these individuals, these same-sex couples. And then I also had read something that the Mormon Church is working in that direction as well, and they were predicting by 2025 that the Mormon Church is going to allow same-sex marriages too. So obviously this is being pushed by society, this is being pushed by our world, and you're not being accepting, or what's the word, the big word they like to use, inclusive, tolerant, if you don't allow these things. Well, again, it goes back to this is God regulated, and this is between a male and a female. And this is in the words of Jesus, where he says male and female, and he says mother and father, and so they're man and husband and wife. So it's two genders, and that's very clear, and there's no ambiguity with that whatsoever. So that's pretty clear even from this passage. And then also, I think just something that goes along with what we've already talked about, but it's very clear that this is a leaving and a cleaving relationship. And so this isn't a relationship where, okay, we're going to now combine our incomes and we're going to be friends. We might live in the same house. No, this is a leaving and a cleaving. You are creating this new family unit. And I think that that's something, too, that is that we can learn about God's design for marriage from this passage. Anything else that anybody come away with? All right, so staying with Matthew 19 and in verse 9, so I says, what is fornication? And the Greek word that is used there for fornication is porneia, as it's used in Matthew 19:9, and that's the translated word in the King James Version. And how does God's law differ from societal standards on divorce and remarriage? So what is fornication or porneia as it's used in Matthew 19 and verse 9? How would you define it? Jesse?
Not Jackson Flowers. I was looking at Jesse Flowers, but I got Jesse Jackson on my
Mine, and so that's
It's just because I love
You're
it.
thinking about both of us. Thayer's defines it as illicit sexual intercourse in general, and we know that word fornication includes adultery, incest, homosexuality, bestiality.
Okay.
Anybody else? What was that? Oh. And I probably should have said this at the beginning. I hope that everybody knows with the questions, I'm not trying to embarrass anybody. These are serious questions and they're serious Bible topics. So when we start talking about things in depth in regards to fornication and sexual immorality and even sex between a husband and a wife, obviously people tend to get embarrassed. And so my intention is not to embarrass anybody. So if I'm calling on you even with that, I'm not trying to pick on you. I want us to be able to have an open and honest discussion so that we can walk away from this being benefited and our families can grow stronger because of it. And one of the reasons that I ask this question in particular is because there's such a misunderstanding. It's a gross misunderstanding of what this actually means. So Jesse mentioned for us the definition from Thayer's, and so I've got a few that I wanted to kind of bring to our attention. So the New American Testament Greek lexicon defines it as illicit sexual intercourse, adultery, fornication, homosexuality, lesbianism, intercourse with animals, which would be bestiality, etc. Sexual intercourse with close relatives, as in Leviticus 18, sexual intercourse with a divorced man or woman from Mark chapter 10, verse 11. And then if you look at Vine's expository dictionary of the New Testament words, for porneia, it's used of illicit sexual intercourse. And it lists a couple passages there from Matthew 5:32 and 19:9, which would include adultery. And then Jesse read for us Thayer's, the illicit sexual intercourse in general, distinguished from adultery in Matthew 15:19. And then Art Gingrich's lexicon, prostitution, unchastity, fornication of every kind of unlawful sexual intercourse. And then the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, fornication. The New Testament is characterized by an unconditional repudiation of all extramarital and unnatural intercourse. And then finally, the Analytical Lexicon to the Greek New Testament, generally every kind of extramarital, unlawful, or unnatural sexual intercourse. And so does anybody see a recurring theme through all of the definitions? Sexual intercourse. Okay, so this is a lot of different dictionaries that are defining this Greek word, this Greek term, porneia, but the definitions make it clear, should be pretty clear to us that porneia always includes sexual intercourse. That's key. All right, whenever we are talking about Matthew 19:9 and the only exception for divorce. We have to understand what the Greek word actually means, because people will tell you, my translation actually says, in the New American Standard, it says sexual immorality. All right, that's a pretty broad term in terms of the English language. Sexual immorality is a very broad term. But when we talk about sexual intercourse, now we've narrowed it down a lot from the way our English words have translated the word porneia. And so this, again, not trying to be crude, but this would require physical contact of the sexual organs. And when we're talking about sexual intercourse. And so this does not include exposure. Exposure is not going to be sexual intercourse. And so are those things outside of the marriage relationship sinful? Absolutely. And we can turn to Galatians chapter 5 and verse 19, and we can read about all of the other sexual sins. And one of those that, one of the words that is used there in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 19 is the word, the Greek word aselgia, which is translated as lasciviousness in Galatians 5:19. And so that's a more broad term of sexual immorality, I'll say. And so if you actually look at Galatians 5:19, the Greek word porneia and the Greek word aselgia are both used. Okay, so if Jesus wanted to have broadened it when he was telling people that you can't divorce except for porneia, he could have just as easily said except for porneia and aselgia. And when you look at the word for aselgia, the Thayer's Greek lexicon is wanton acts or manners as filthy words, indecent bodily movements, unchaste handling of males and females, etc. So that's a much broader term than porneia and the sexual intercourse. All right? And again, why are we spending so much time on this? Because not only is this going to differ from society's views on reasons that we can get divorced, this is a big thing within the church. And we have many people within the church that are starting to broaden. I'm trying to remember the term Jesse used. He had a picture of a rubber band. What was the term you used?
He had a sermon about
this. Has been a while back. Stretching the truth, I think is what it was. And we have many within the church that are stretching the term for porneia to allow Christians to get divorced and tell them that they have the right to remarry because they're divorcing for porneia, when they're divorcing for aselgia, not porneia. And that obviously is a situation where you are condoning sin. Now you have created a sinful situation between that husband and that wife, and whoever the one is that you said had the right to divorce. Now when they remarry, now they're in a sinful relationship, and you've got kids involved. It's just a very, very dangerous and sinful situation that we have to make sure that we are aware of. Any other comments on or questions on that? I hope that that's clear. It is something that you need to be prepared to answer. And
it's really sad that we live in such, I wouldn't even say times necessarily, because even like Sodom and Gomorrah times where people take this marriage, this vow that you made to be with your mate for a lifetime through all these different kinds of situations that we wouldn't even have to think about, well, they're over here looking at pornography, or they're over here sexting somebody, or they're over whatever. Then, I mean, we've come to the place where it's really just sad to me that we even have to talk about these things, that people don't take their marriage seriously enough to just stay away from all of those things.
Yep, definitely. Any other comments on, go ahead, Norm.
Well, you made a good point earlier, amongst other points, that those other things are sin also. I mean, you can lose your soul for those other things too. You just can't get divorced for it, because you'll lose your soul for that too, by the way. And it's just one of these one of these areas again of trying to put lipstick on a pig. You know, it just.
And thank you for making that point, because I don't want anybody coming out of here, or even later, somebody's going to watch this on YouTube and be like, can you believe what Jason just said? All right, I'm not condoning any SLGA practices, okay? I'm not condoning pornography within a relationship, or unchaste handling, or whatever else you want to throw in the lasciviousness bucket. That's sinful, all right? And it's not okay. And your marriage is going to suffer big time. And you've got some things you got to do some correcting. And that's going to majorly affect the home and the family and the strength of that. But that doesn't give you the right to divorce your husband or your wife because of that. All right? That's what I'm saying. Those things are bad. It's bad for your marriage. But you can't divorce over it. All right? And we've got Christians today that are making people feel that you can, that it's perfectly okay, and it's not. Because that's not what God said. And again, this is God regulated. I don't care what some Christian man or Christian woman or what kind of background they have. Just because they say it doesn't change what God said. All right? So we've got to stick to what God says about it.
The Jewish people would have understood that word because they were used to it. But where we've translated it, then depending on who, then they can either make it really strict, like they understood it to be, or they can kind of make it a little bit more milder.
Yeah.
But the Jews would have understood it quite well.
It's kind of like
The translation, love, obviously we have just one English word, but there's a lot of different Greek words, and we'll talk about that some in lesson 3 too. And that makes it somewhat confusing. It can make it confusing for us. And I'm not a Greek scholar by any means, but we do have the Greek definitions of these words, and makes it easier for us to understand what God was talking about, and makes it easier for us to understand like the Jews would have understood as well. So question number 4, what are the characteristics of a God-designed marriage? Use Bible passages to support your answer. So what are some characteristics of a God-designed marriage? Marissa?
Bonnie?
Well, thinking about how a woman was made as a helpmate or helper for her husband, a counterpart. In Ecclesiastes 4:9-12, it talks about, even though it's not specifically about marriage, it's talking about how two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If one falls down, one can lift up his companion. If two lie down together, they keep warm. And then Norm brought up earlier about the cord of 3 strands is not quickly torn apart. So it's a companionship. That's one characteristic, I think, of a marriage. It's a helpmeet, it's a companionship, friendship.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't put that one down, but with 10 or 12 books that I read, at least over half of them had that as one of the characteristic of a good marriage is going to be companionship. Lena, what's a good characteristic of a God-designed marriage?
Oneness was all the previous words that you were using, leaving and cleaving, and Matthew 19 together.
Okay.
Jesse says love.
Yeah.
That obviously should be a huge one. That should be probably at the top of the characteristic of a God-designed marriage is love. And we'll talk some more about that with lesson 3 and the different types of love. I mean, that's commanded of a husband, obviously. And we could talk about 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and what love means, but that's a huge characteristic. If you're going to have a godly marriage, there's going to be love. If you ain't got no love, it ain't a godly marriage. Clarissa?
Of course, I kind of just listed the things like from Ephesians 5 and 1 Peter and things like that, but it's a sacrificial love, really on both sides, and respectful love. I mean, there's different roles, but, you know, if each is doing those roles, obviously it's going to strengthen that bond and make it strong. So it's easy for a wife to submit her husband's authority and to respect her husband. when her husband shows her true love and true care. And really, even the husband's love is so sacrificial in all that he has to do to care for her and maintain, her and for her soul. So all that has to work together.
Okay,
Ken?
you got a characteristic?
I would say commitment.
Okay,
And it goes back to what we were saying a moment ago, is
yeah.
Can't go into it just thinking you're going to be friends. Bill, you got a characteristic?
Well, it is important to like each other as well as loving each other.
Yeah, it's true.
But
It is hard to love them if you don't like them.
That's true. I agree with everything that's been said. The oneness, the church is told to be of the same mind, like-minded. That extends to the marriage relationship big time. That you're pulling in the same direction, and the aspect of the love involved and the commitment that's also important.
All right.
Clarissa?
And I taught the ladies class on Monday night, and one thing that I kind of talked about is we're not going to do all of this perfectly all the time, because we live in this world and we're sinful people. And so, again, that's another good reason why we're doing this class. It may seem like, yeah, I agree with that, I agree with that, I agree with that, but it's good to have that refresher to get back on track when you get off, because you're not always going to communicate the best. You're not always going to respect each other the best. You may know that's what the Bible says, but you're in the thick of it. So then you need to learn to communicate and to get back on track and harmonize on all those. So no one's going to have a perfect marriage all the time. You have to always keep trying and always keep trying to improve on all these characteristics we're talking about.
Okay.
So communication, is everybody a natural born communicator? Sure, right? I mean, we can all talk, speak. No, obviously we're not all natural born communicators. But we can make our marriages stronger. We can make them more meaningful. We can make them more rewarding whenever we have better communication. And so when we're talking specifically about communication in general, but even more so when we're talking about communication within the marriage relationship, we have to make sure that we make it a point that our speech to one another, our communication to one another is gracious. And that's Colossians chapter 4, verse 6. Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person. So that we should have that with everybody, but boy, we better have that with our spouse. That we're going to talk with graciousness with one another. Lena?
I cannot say that I have a verse specifically about marriage, but forgiveness and, being ready to forgive and being ready to apologize, because it's a big one in the course of everything, again, that was discussed, was the porneia word. Because, one thing is for us not to do it, other thing, not to do all the other things that you mentioned that are not the reason for divorce, but the other thing is to be able to forgive the other person. Because if you don't forgive and you stay together, there will always be that nail in the flesh that's supposed to be all together.
Yeah.
But I mean, many other things that we do that we have to.
Absolutely.
And that's one that I have bolded in my notes, is practice forgiveness, because ain't nobody perfect. And Ephesians 4:32 is the passage that I have. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. So that's a huge part of a marriage relationship. It's difficult sometimes when you think that they're really trying to get at you, but we've got to be willing to forgive. And one of the things that Lena said made me think of another point that I wanted to make too, back with the porneia, just real quick. Just because your spouse commits porneia doesn't mean you have to get a divorce, okay? I'm not saying that either, all right? Actually, if you can work through it, it's going to be better for the family, but God does allow divorce for that reason. But you don't have to get divorced for that reason. So back to the communication thing, though. Besides making your speech gracious. You also need to be able to accept some criticism, some loving criticism. I mean, if there is love in the relationship and your spouse may see things in you that maybe you can't see and maybe they're trying to help you, then we need to be able to listen to that. Proverbs 27 verse 6 says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy." And hopefully our spouses are our friend. And so we need to be able to accept that and take that. And then also having openness in our communication with one another. And then also with this idea of communication, I would say that you need to be able to listen. And that's James 1:19 through 20. It tells us that everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And so I always heard God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. And so if there's anybody that you need to listen to, it needs to be your spouse. And so we need to be able to listen to them. And then I think a big one is the golden rule, okay? All right, again, this goes back to just general humanity, general Christianity, but you want to treat others the way that you want to be treated. And so if you want your spouse to treat you kindly and respectfully, then you need to treat them that way. That should be just a clear thing, but that's going to be something that's going to make for a better marriage. And I think that is a characteristic of a God-designed marriage. And then the last one I have is probably the most critical, and that is the characteristic of a God-designed marriage is going to be a marriage that trusts God. And that's where the focus has got to be. Because the truth is, all of us are coming from different backgrounds, and so we all bring our own opinions, we all bring our past experiences into a marriage. And so how are you supposed to sort out disagreements over, how you're going to run the home, or what about work, and what about money, and what about the kids, and what about the in-laws, and you got all these different opinions and all these situations, and it goes on and on and on and on. And, well, how do you answer all of those questions? You trust in God. And we have to make sure that in our marriages we're giving God control. And whenever, as a couple, you choose to trust God, it's not that conflicts are going to go away. It's not even that bad decisions are going to go away, but they will be decreased. And you're going to have a better marriage because of it. And so when we think about trusting in God, I think of Proverbs 3:5 through 7. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord, and turn away from evil. So what's one of the things that you can kind of see about some characteristics of a godly marriage?
Okay.
Is it just in our marriage relationship that we see, Norm?
I was going to say it's the same principles that you use for everybody, especially like the submission part, because you have the man submits to God, woman submits to man. Everybody is in a submitting mode to somebody, and then of course he says, and you all ought to be submitting to each other, and so we have multiple relationships out there. This happens to be the closest one, and is really supposed to be the pinnacle of the closeness of a relationship between a man and a woman on earth.
All right.
So I do think that outside of the oneness, and then outside of the love and the eros sense, all of these are ways that we should treat everybody as Christians. So a lot of this is basic Christianity. And so when you're in your marriage relationship, I don't know why, but what often happens, even with Christian marriages, is you treat your spouse worse than you treat your brothers and sisters in Christ. Or you treat your spouse worse than you treat even people in the world. And so if we can get back to just basic Christianity and the characteristics of what it is to be a Christian and to be Christ-like, then our marriages are going to be much better off because of that. Go ahead, Ken.
That is that two married people are with each other so much of the time that they become, especially when you're retired, that you begin to get under each other's skin because you know what they're thinking, kind of like, and you kind of like expect certain results from certain things, and it can become annoying.
If everybody can see the face
On Sue's face right now.
I remember talking to April like a year ago or something, and she was talking about somebody that, like closer to my age, who got a divorce, was getting a divorce or something, and April made the statement, she said, I just don't understand that, because when you've been together all that time, why would you get a divorce then? And I didn't say anything to her. In my head, I was thinking, yeah, but when you're together 24 hours a day, there's some things that get on your nerves that didn't bother you when they went to work all the time.
So, this is a great point, though, because I think some of us go into this class and we're thinking, okay, well, I've been married for 20 years. I don't need a class on marriage. Well, I mean, I'm already out of whatever phase of, I don't need this home and family class. Okay, this is applicable to every one of us. In some form or fashion, this is applicable to every one of us. Jesse Jackson?
You need to understand this relationship. I think fundamental purpose is because the church is metaphorically, the bride of Christ. And if you cannot understand the oneness concept, how do you understand that they all be one in me as I am in you and you are in me? And it's massive, right? That's how big it is.
Absolutely. So,
I'm intentionally not trying to rush through this because to me this is the foundation of the home and family, is the marriage relationship. Okay, we're going to talk about parenting, but if you don't have a good marriage and a good relationship at home, I don't care what kind of parenting you're doing, all right, you've got problems. So lesson 3, I do just want to point out, with question 1 and question 4, so I've listed a whole bunch of passages for you to look at, and then I ask you to list and explain the roles of both the man and the woman. So I don't want you just writing down, okay, well, I'm supposed to be submissive, I'm supposed to respect. No, what does that mean? All right, what does it mean for the wife to be submissive? What does it mean for the man to be the head of the household? Put some time in trying to explain, so whenever we discuss those, we can have a good discussion about some of these specific roles. So we'll pick up with question 5 on lesson 2 next week. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the discussion.